Greetings, my friends. It is Uncle Mike, and today is February the 3rd, 2023, 2323, for the followers of the Gregorian calendar system, the numbering system, the ways to put the concept of the unfolding of time into a particular framework. I mean, that's what these calendar systems are, particularly when they number them. But nonetheless, that is what today is. And it's been a while, so I hope everybody is finding themselves in a good and comfortable place. And I got a good story for you today. But before I begin, let me give a little bit of point of reference about this time. Yesterday was February 2nd, which is known as Imbolc, also Groundhog's Day. Both of those are celebrated on February 2nd, and February 2nd marks the midpoint between the winter solstice and the spring equinox. There are 8 points on the wheel of the year, as it is sometimes known, the annual solar cycle, and those points are the solstices, the equinoxes, and then the midpoints in between them. And these have long been traditional times for celebration, or holidays, I guess, if you will. And so that's one point. The second point is Groundhog's Day, which is celebrated here kind of in a tongue-in-cheek sort of way in America, is traditionally a Pennsylvania Dutch holiday. And it is utilizing the groundhog as a predictor of will the cold weather continue? Will there be an early spring or a late spring? Will winter go long? Side note: this is an example of how the poetic nature of the English language. By poetic nature, I mean words that can have multiple meanings depending upon context. This is an example of that by the use of like winter and spring, because on one hand we define winter and spring as two markers on of the solar path as defined by equinoxes and solstices, but then on the other hand, we use those words in a more subjective sense to refer to, like, winter being the really cold time of year and spring when it starts getting warm. So on one hand, there can be no early or late winter or spring. It's just like, it's going to be when the equinox happens. But the way it is used in a more subjective, colloquial way, it has a different meaning. And so, this kind of points to, as I said, the nature, or an example of the poetic nature of our language, but then also points deeper to why all narratives can deconstruct, because built into our very structure, at least in English, is the fact that words can mean something different depending upon context. But I like to go down rabbit holes, and there was a rabbit hole, so let me go circle back. So yesterday was Groundhog's Day, and Groundhog's Day is Pennsylvania Dutch. I'm in Pennsylvania Dutch country. Pennsylvania Dutch is often corresponded, but it's not limited to Amish and Mennonite communities, but I live in that area where there's high concentrations of Pennsylvania Dutch. Groundhog's Day became, I guess it's been a national holiday since the early 1900s, but it really became ingrained in the culture. Like it gathered a deeper meaning through the Bill Murray film Groundhog's Day. And there is a link to Groundhog's Day. Well, two things. One is it points to the cyclical nature of reality. I'm assuming that everyone here is familiar with Groundhog's Day, where the character keeps reliving the same day over and over again until he kind of like breaks out of it. And on one level, that points to, let's say, the circle of the year, like what I made reference to earlier, the equinox to solstice, or equinox to midpoint, to solstice to midpoint to equinox, and the turning of them, the seasons. That's the never-ending story. That's like, the setting of life here in this realm, which we're experiencing life. You could look at it that way, in a very um, uh, non-nefarious sort of way, like, that just points to the predictable backdrop of our reality, just like the predictable backdrop of the inhale and the exhale. Like, I don't know what you're going to be doing next week, but I can say with high certainty you're probably going to be breathing. That's the backdrop of your experience. I don't know what's going to be happening, in the future, but I can assume that there's still going to be equinoxes and solstices and seasons, if you will. So on that level, it's not necessarily so nefarious. But then Groundhog's Day also points to another nature, which is like being caught in this invisible repeating of, like, going round and round and round and round. So that's also tied into the word Groundhog's Day. But Groundhog's Day has a more personal meaning for me, because the National Groundhog's Day ceremony takes place in Puxatawney, Pennsylvania, which is part of the Susquehanna mystery. I'm not going to go too deep into that, but there are more or less three endpoints on the Susquehanna River. You've got the beginning of the northern branch, you got the beginning of the western branch, and then both of them enter into the Atlantic, or they join together, and then they enter into the Atlantic at the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay, because the Chesapeake Bay is, it's the Susquehanna River, just in different form. And at each one of these endpoints is a national secular holiday, which just so happens to fall upon one of the key points of the wheel. So at the northern branch is at Cooperstown, New York, where the Baseball Hall of Fame is. And you'll see that the Baseball Hall of Fame induction weekend is always the weekend closest to the 1st of August. And that is when we have Lammas. Lammas is the midpoint between the mid of the summer solstice and the spring equinox. You'll see down at Norfolk, Virginia, which is basically where the Chesapeake Bay enters the Atlantic. There they have a May Day celebration, which is held in that town. May Day is the midpoint between the spring equinox and the summer solstice. May Day has all sorts of esoteric significance. And then on the western branch, we find Puxatawney Phil in Puxatawney, Pennsylvania, and the national Groundhog's Day celebration. And if you go and look at, I've talked about this many times before. I mean, it's a pretty Masonic sort of veiled Masonic celebration. I say that based upon the top hats and the tuxedos and the structure of the sacred order of they've got like some sort of goofy name for the gentlemen who kind of like run the show. But nonetheless, so that ties into like, my story because the Susquehanna mystery and so forth. Where am I? I'm 8 minutes in. And I was just doing that as a setup because yesterday marked the 1-year anniversary of when I moved to Baltimore. So on 2/2/22, I moved out of my house when I was living in Millersville, Pennsylvania, and then I moved into Baltimore. And it started this journey for me of this past year, and it's been a wild journey. One of the things which I feel like I've taken the year off. I mean, the amount of content which I put out, the amount of anything which I've really done is really, it trickled down to very little for, a variety of reasons. And, I feel like, well, I'm definitely coming back, but like I'm coming back different. During this time, I've seen so much of my own life deconstruct, some of it being very obvious, just like, where and how I was living. who I was living with, who my life was spent with. But then I also saw like different narratives within myself, uh, those stories deconstruct in a real way. New people, new storylines, all this stuff kind of came into my life, and that's when I personally reflect back upon this past year. Um, what I see is that I see like all that went away, and then I see all that came into my life. Um, but most interestingly, and that's what we're going to talk about today, is I the structure, this thing beneath the seeming experiences of my life, which was there, which definitely begs to ask a lot of like big questions. What is the nature of reality? Why would this be? Am I writing this? Is it writing me? All of these sort of questions. So, and it kind of points to even the movie Groundhog's Day, because Groundhog's Day is a little bit of a fantasy movie, but it's presented in very, very like regular experiential reality. Like they appear to be regular characters. They're not like superhero characters. It's not like you're watching a Marvel blockbuster film, but these supernatural. And when I say supernatural, just maybe more unexplainable things. Like, the question in the movie Groundhog's Day is like, why is this happening? Why each day does this character played by Bill Murray, why does that occur? That's just kind of like never addressed. It's just that, oh, it is occurring. And it also reminds me of a movie called Stranger Than Fiction with Will Ferrell. So another one of these Saturday Night Live alumni characters. And that also is this kind of like question of like, what exactly is reality? Who's writing what? And I'm going to very much say that I feel that way sometimes as it relates to my life. And so the story, which I'm going to tell you today, is just that. So without any further ado, let us begin. All right. I'm calling this practically time traveling by the collapsing of narrative. It's never good when you got to explain a joke, but I mean, that's rule one. Like if you got to explain to people why something's funny, well, then it's definitely not funny or it misses its mark. But I'm going to explain to you the double entendre in this title. Practically time traveling. And so the word practically, like, is this what I'm going to talk about? Is this like almost time traveling? Am I practically time traveling? Or is it practically as in practical? Like this is practical time traveling. Like it's a little bit, time travel might not be the H.G. Wells version of time machines and stuff like that, in which Hollywood has placed upon so many of our imaginations. But nonetheless, is this time travel? We're going to deal with time travel and the relationship of between that and collapsing of narratives. And so part of the Groundhog's Day movie is the Bill Murray character, his narrative, who he saw himself as. Like that's ultimately the biggest narrative we all carry, is the stories which we tell of ourselves and what we tell of our lives, like as that collapsed, as I saw that collapse in my own life, like, there's this time travel sort of element which came into play. So my story, this chapter for me really began January 26th. So let's go back. This email came to me November 30th, 2021, 2 days before my 50th birthday. A handful of days before a solar eclipse, and it's from a guy who says he's a 33-degree Freemason, and he invites me to come and speak in front of a group of other Freemasons who are very interested in esoteric topics, esoteric research, and he gave me this date. And I've gone through this story immensely, but this is really where it began for me in terms of this transition into this next iteration of my life, of time travel, all this sort of stuff. And so January 26th, last year, I gave a presentation in front of these Masons. And at the very end, I said to them, I made the bold declaration that though I was not initiated into their fraternity, they, as symbols in our culture of initiation, they witnessed my Michael Wan's initiation with life. And I took a bow, and that's how I ended that presentation. And I was being kind of tongue in cheek. I didn't even know what I was saying. I just knew like the words to say, and famous last words. And then like immediately after that, the shit hits the fan in my life. And then on February 2nd, so what would that be? That would be 7 days later, 1 week later, I find myself moving to Baltimore. And when I moved to Baltimore, like there were two things that were happening. There was like I guess there are three things that are happening. So there's one is the practical experiential level of like living life, like all of the things of like moving from where you're living, how you're living, who you're living with, all of that, like, that changed. And then there's another level, which is like, how that affects one's inner world. That's not as obvious because you can't necessarily see someone's inner experience, but the inner experience is always tied to the outer experience. So that was occurring. But the strangest thing about it was this connection of this place which I moved to my mother's family line. So this is Baltimore. This is the house which I ended up living in for 108 days. It's 4505 Prospect Circle. I'll always be indebted to Scotty, Scotty Evans, who opened up his house to me, not knowing me very well. And we had an amazing adventure at the asylum in Baltimore, as we called it. But I didn't know Scotty very well when I knew I needed a place to live very quickly, and he was on a short list of people who I called up because I knew that he had rental properties. I'm like, well, maybe he might have something which I can go move into quickly, and sure enough, he did, and this was the address. The house was located here overlooking Leakin Park, this immensely large wooded, forested park in Baltimore, the urban environment, Baltimore. And this house was on a ridge overlooking this stream. It was a real special place. No heat, amazing views, but this is the house. And the point of what I'm trying to make is where this was the house right here, this is where my mother grew up. And I didn't know that until like maybe about a month afterwards. So this is where my grandfather, who died, my mother's father, who probably died when I was 5 years old, but I know that this is where he played golf. And like, this is how I used to drive when I would leave to go back to Lancaster. I would drive out of this neighborhood, come down here, turn down Hillsdale Road and take it to, God, I can't remember what the name of this road is here. Liberty Heights, Liberty Street. This would take me to 495. Let's see, that would take me to 495, like right here. And I would go past, like literally, I would go past my mother's line. And so my mother's parents were both born in Baltimore, and their parents, so 2 generations removed from my mother, were from another part of the world. My grandmother's side was from what's now Ukraine, and my grandfather's side was from Poland. And their family, when they arrived in the New World, they arrived in Baltimore, and they stayed ever since. And so I found myself on this Groundhog's Day kind of collapsed down family line. I find myself less than a mile from where my grandmother and my mother grew up. And I always just assumed, like, it was so close to this park, this recreational area, that of course my mother and my grandmother probably spent time here. So that was always kind of interesting to me. But that's just the setup. So we're going to begin right now. We're going to start this Winter Fair, Rudolf Steiner, and a dinner party invitation. On December 4th of this year, 2022, was Winter Fair at the Susquehanna Waldorf School. My children graduated from there. They're no longer in the Waldorf School. It goes through 8th grade. This is what it looks like on the outside. And they're in high school now, but part of the Winter Fair Waldorf tradition is it's kind of like a homecoming for the students. And so my boys went to this Waldorf, to Winter Fair, and I went and I picked them up and I was going to drive them home. And Winter Fair, I mean, the boys were involved with the Waldorf School for probably 10 years. So I went to 10 Winter Fairs, and each one always, maybe not each one, but I've had some very, very significant, strange, weird experiences that were always tied to the Winter Fair happening. You know, you could go and interpret that any way you like, you know, some sort of strange bleed through from the astral planes of Rudolf Steiner. I don't know. I just know that that is happening. So this year was kind of no different. So I was at Winter Fair, and then the woman who I'm in relationship with, Christy, who I met at Myco Fest, I've talked about that this past summer, she called me up the day of Winter Fair, and she's like, listen, there's a dinner party. There's a dinner party which I want you to come to. And in fact, I had to go there because there's something I need to deliver, and I want you to come to it. And so this right here is where Marietta is. This is where the Waldorf School is. And the dinner party is here. This is Berks County. This is all Pennsylvania. This is Susquehanna River. This is Lancaster County. This is York County. This is Berks County. And this is where the dinner party was. It's probably about an hour and change in car ride. I didn't really want to go, to be quite honest, because this was a weird day for me. I was kind of tired. It was cold, but I had to go there. And so sure enough, I go to this dinner party. And the dinner party wasn't a particularly big one. There were 2, 4, 5 other people there. So I go, and it is in a house in Berks County. And the house was built in the late 1700s. And I didn't realize that when I came into the house. It was dark when I drove through here. I'm not very familiar with this part of Pennsylvania, and I couldn't really see much. But when I was driving in, because it was dark out, and when I was there, when the owner told me the house was built in the 1700s, I kind of caught my interest. It caught my interest for a variety of reasons. Like I find housing to be interesting, just like, the practical nature of like how and where people live in architecture, but then also like building techniques or construction techniques, on a practical level. I think that's kind of interesting. So, all right. So Bechtelsville and the father's line via space, material reality. All right. So this is my family line. This is me. That's my father. That's my grandfather. That's his father, his father, his father, his father. And this guy right here is the first of the Juan line, which I'm a part of, to come to the colonies. And I actually learned this story. Like, I mean, this the very first time I was contacted in the mail from, I'm not really certain exactly who or what the connection is, but I've covered this in the past. I got a poem in a Freemasonic folder. I believe it was 2019, December of 2019. That then kicked off. Someone gave me a piece of information. They told me about George Wesley Wan as I guess that would be my great-great-grandfather. I never heard of that, and I didn't think the person knew what they were talking about who told me that, but I was able to go and verify. They knew exactly what they're talking about, and from that I was able to go back and trace to Johann Wilhelm Wan. Point I'm just making right now is that also has like some sort of, indirect Freemasonic connection. Take that any way you want. Me, just to be clear, I'm no Freemason. I take no oaths, all that sort of stuff. So anyway, so this is it. Johann Wilhelm Wahn, born 1735 before in Rhineland-Pfalz, Germany. These are his parents. And then what is visible, or what is known, is that that he was married. So this would be my great-grandmother in Amityville, Berks, PA, and then died in Amity, Berks, PA. And so let's go back to this map. This here is Berks County. I lived here in Lancaster. I knew about Berks County. I knew that I had family for about 2 years ago, like my ancestral lines go through Berks County, but I don't know Berks very well. So when I found out that this house, which I was having a dinner party, was in Berks, like I was like, wow, like let me go back. And all I remembered from, prior to doing this presentation, I remembered this Berks part, but I didn't remember this Amityville. So shortly after, and I can see this, I could see that they're from Germany and that they married 1766 in Amityville. So I get back home the next day and I start doing a little bit of research for old churches in Amityville. And I see this one, this St. Paul's United Church of Christ. Looks like it started in 1745 in Amityville, and it was well attended. It was for the Germans. So it's like, it's probably a fair assumption that if they got married at a church, my ancestors in Amityville, and they were German, that this would probably be it. So let's go look at the map. This is where Amityville is. This is where Marietta was, where I said the day began. This is the Susquehanna River. This is the Chesapeake Bay. The Susquehanna River becomes the Chesapeake Bay. You could see this right here. This is an estuary, salt water and fresh water. It's because the Atlantic rose, or at least they told us, 12,000 years ago, and it created this estuary, this salt water, brackish water sort of waterscape. This is where Baltimore is, this is where Philadelphia is, so that'll give us a point of reference. And then this is Amityville, and then right here is where the house is in Bechtelsville. And so we could see right here, this is where the house is, this is where the St. Paul United Church is, and they're hair under 8 miles apart. Not exactly in the exact same place, not bullseye, but they're 8 miles apart. That's pretty close. So fast forward, that was in early December, and then you could see in late December, the 27th, me and Christy, we signed a lease. We signed a lease at the very house where this dinner party was being held, and we moved in on January 1st. In the land, quite literally, like I'm finding myself now living in the land in which my earliest ancestors lived, almost a year, like 11 lunations, if you will, from when I moved to the land of my mother's line. And all of this is just kind of like happening. Like I didn't plan this, like, it's just unfolding. I'm witnessing it occurring. Like I can see like what's going on. The moving in here was not done for the purpose of I want to go and live in the land in which my father's people lived in. It was because it made the most amount of sense on the most practical level of where and what I was doing in my life. But there's more. All right. Boyertown and art via space. So, all right. So this is Bechtelsville. This is Amityville. This is Boyertown. This, from here to here, we said is 8 miles. And Boyertown's like this tiny little town in the middle of more or less, nowhere, PA. We got it right here. This is Amityville. we could even call this the wilderness. In fact, that is a terminology I have used before to describe the vast land between the Delaware River and the Susquehanna River and the Chesapeake Bay and the Delaware Bay. This is the wilderness. This is where Kelpius and the Ephrata Cloister is right here. This is where it all took place. And so we've got Boyertown right here. I met Christy at when I did the MycoFest event with Ross Ben, which I want to say took place up here. This is where I met her. And as it turns out, well, she was raised. She grew up in Boyertown. And when I had first moved to Bechtelsville, when we moved into Bechtelsville, I was pretty much under the impression I had never been here before. I'm like, I've never been to this part of PA before. You know, I know that I have an ancestral link here, but I've never been here physically. So once we moved into the house, we are doing these monthly starboard events with other people who have starboards. We call it the Fellowship of the Board. And the house in which we are living in, built in the 1700s, doesn't have internet access. And we found a place where we are able to hold these sessions, these Fellowship of the Boards. And it's right here in Boyertown. You can see this is a letter I send out, Fellowship of the Board, Snow Moon, first quarter. And it's at this place called Studio B in Boyertown, Pennsylvania. The reason why we're there is because Christy, who grew up in the area, an English teacher who was influential in her upbringing, now manages this studio, and it was just an easy thing for us to do. So this is downtown Boyertown, tiny little town. I've never been there before. We're going to the very first one of these, the Fellowship of the Boards at Studio B, when all of a sudden something hits me. Hits me like it stops me in my tracks. What stopped me in my tracks is I had been here before. I had been here before. So about 10 years ago, when, no, even more than that, like, you know, probably before 2012, it was when I was making a lot of my collage work, and I was doing a lot of, I had a nice archive of my work, and it was really nice for art shows. And I was doing regular art shows where I would go to either a gallery or to a restaurant, and then for like maybe a month, my artwork would hang on the walls, and there'd usually be like a reception on the opening night, and I'd hang it up like before that, and then like a month later I'd come and take it down. And for the most part, like I was doing all of that. I was living in Lancaster at the time, and I was doing it mostly in this area. And I remember I received an invitation. I received an invitation by some gallery I'd never heard of. Someone who saw the work and said, hey, would you come and would you be the artist of the month at our gallery? And I can remember my thought process. I was like, I'm going to go and do this, but it makes no sense because it's kind of a pain in the ass to go and like you bring all your art and you hang it on the walls and this one was really far away, and it didn't seem to make sense. There wasn't like a population center there, but for whatever reason I went and did it. So if you can imagine, or if you can see where I'm going, it was at this gallery and studio in Boyertown called Cleode. You could see that this is the only thing I could verify that this exists. This is a video from 2010. You could see right here, the entry to our shop is gallery filled with original artwork for sale. Shows rotate every third Friday of the month. I was one of these shows, like in this time period, and we could see this address. It's 1 East Philadelphia Avenue. I tried to go through my emails. I tried to go through my personal records when I was putting this presentation together, because I want to be able to give some sort of receipts. I want you to go and see that I'm not just like making this up. So the best I could get is I got this email. This is from December 29th, 2020, right? And it was from from a mailing list, and you can see it says Coyote Studios Gmail, and this is at the very bottom of it. It's Danny Fisher. Danny is the woman who was behind this, and you can see the address. She had since moved to Arizona, and I guess she continues the Coyote name and is doing that out in Arizona, but this is the address in which her whoever manages her email, when you send out lots of emails, it's in Birdsboro, and that's right here. So this is where Boyerstown is. I'm just trying to give some degree of demonstration. Like, I'm not just making this stuff up, but this is what I'd been to Boyerstown before. There's a magnetism which is seemingly pulling me in this area of my ancestry. And so not only that, we see this. 1 East Philadelphia Avenue is where this Coyote is. And where this is on Studio B. And if you go and you look at a map, this is where Studio B is, and this is where 1 East Philadelphia Avenue is. They're literally like 400 feet apart. It's 300 feet apart. So we've got that going on. But we're gonna go a little bit deeper before we get to the really weird stuff. So Thunder Hill and childhood home via name. So also in Bechtelsville is this right here. This is a NASCAR racetrack. Kind of give you a little bit of an idea of the flavor of the greater area. And for 31 of the past 33 years, so this came out January 24th, 2023, Napa Auto Parts was the lead sponsor of Thunder on the Hill Racing Series. So this is where that racetrack is. This is where the house is. You could see it's less than a mile away. And this is like the billboard, which is on that racetrack. We see it's Thunder on the Hill. It's Napa. This is what's there. So why is that significant? So, all right, this is my mom, Phyllis Wam. You just go and I typed her name in, and you could see like all of her previous addresses. And her and my father used to live in Ocean Pines, which is right outside Ocean City, Maryland. We live in Columbia, Maryland. I've talked about that a lot. They moved there in July of 95. And then prior to that, they lived on 5472 Sleeping Dog Lane. They moved, they purchased it in 1985. That doesn't make sense. Recorded October, because I moved there in 1981. There's no way that does not make sense. But anyway, this here's my childhood home, 5472 Sleeping Dog Lane. Last sold in May 1995. This is where my parents bought their next house, July 95. Probably there was they rented it back. That's pretty common in like house. When you buy and sell houses, you'll have a certain closing date, and then they'll rent it back or something. I don't know, for like 2 months so the person's can move out. But I'm just trying to give you like a some sort of demonstration or receipt of where I live. This was my bedroom right here. This house looks so tiny. I remember it seeming big in my memory. Nonetheless, so I grew up in Columbia, Maryland. This is Columbia. This is where Bechtelsville is. It's about 103 miles away. Baltimore, all of that. And this is Sleeping Dog Lane. That's 5472. This is where I grew up. And you could see it's on Thunder Hill Road. And not just that, here's Sleeping Dog Lane, Thunder Hill Road. Here's Thunder Hill Elementary School. In fact, that's where I went. And I went to elementary school there. Thunder Hill Elementary School celebrating 50 years, 1970 to 2020. And so now here I am as I'm going back down my memory lane, I'm living right here, right by Thunder Hill. So, we got that going on. Take that as you will. So now we're going to get a little bit into time travel and the Tesseract. So all right, so this is what's called a Tesseract. It is a cube within a cube. In geometry, a tesseract is the fourth dimensional analog of the cube. The tesseract is to the cube as the cube is to the square. And the reason why I have this tied into time travel is, at least from a cultural reference point, the Tesseract is tied in to time travel. First through the children's book A Wrinkle in Time, which I believe came out in the 50s, maybe? I don't know. I should have probably done a little bit more looking into that before I put these slides together. But The Wrinkle in Time, and then they made a movie about it, I think a couple years ago. And so it's a time travel movie, and they use a tesseract as the way of traveling through time. The tesseract in A Wrinkle in Time, how does it make interstellar space travel such a cinch? And by the way, in the movie Interstellar, the Christopher Nolan film, which is about time travel, it uses tesseracts as well. But tesseract and time travel are in our collective consciousness. So within this idea, but a tesseract, regardless of time travel or not, let's not even go into that. I talk about time travel a lot. It's one of my favorite topics. I'm not even certain what that means, but whether or not that exists, and the reason why I say it that way is because I'm open to any story being true or false. I'm like, whether it's true or not. What we do know is this concept of a tesseract, this cube within a cube. That's a function. That's an actual thing. And so within this idea, the mathematics and the geometries of the tesseract, there are things which are known as fourth dimensional tesseract numbers. And what that is, because this is a cube within a cube, a tesseract number is a square and then a square. So you take, for example, let's start with the number 1. You square the number 1, 1 squared is 1, and then you square 1 again, and then you have 1, because 1 squared is always 1. Now we go to 2. 2 squared is 4, and then you square 4. 4 squared is 16, so 16 is a tesseract number. So let's go to 3. 3 squared is 9. 9 squared is 81. 81 is a tesseract number. And now the fourth one, number 4 as a tesseract number is 256. 4 squared is 16, and 16 squared is 256. Arguably that 256 is the purest of the tesseract numbers, because the tesseract is based upon a square, which is a four-sided object. You'll see why I'm talking about that in a moment. So, all right, so time travel deals with two things, time and space. So it's like I'm going to a different space. The space may stay the same, but the timeline has changed. So December 27th, 1766, my grandfather to the 8th power marries my grandmother to the 8th power. And keep in mind, tesseract math is 256. I'll get to this in a moment. I'll go back here. My grandfather to the 8th power marries my grandmother to the 8th power on December 27th, 1766 in Amityville, PA. And then on 12/20, this is a contract in a way. And then on 12/27/2022, me and Christy sign in contract to a lease connected to the same part of the world. So let's go look right here, 12/27/766 to 12/27/2022. It's exactly 256 years. So now we're connecting through space because we're in the same location, the same spatial location of my family, which travels through me in DNA, and it's connected through these tesseract numbers, not just any tesseract, but the tesseract number. So whatever that means, that is in play. That is in play, on the heels of the Freemasonic Susquehanna mystery, whatever all of this stuff is, which these stories, which I'm telling you, this is actually happening. So, yeah, we can see right here, we've got the 27th, 256 years, 4 squared. We got all that going on. But our story gets even stranger, richer, better than this. All right, so let's go back to this. This day counter slide. We said 256 years, and the other key number is 93,502. So I knew, when I did the math, immediately when I realized these dates were happening, so I knew that I knew that we were going to sign this lease. We had agreed that we were going to sign the lease and it was going to start January 1, all that sort of stuff. At the time, she was in Allentown and I was still down in Nome Countryside, and we needed to sign it before. And because I knew about this date, I was like, well, it makes the most amount of sense. We're going to go and do it on this date. And then I also knew that it was 256 years, and I knew that was a tesseract number. I knew all that. In fact, even more interesting is, or just as interesting, is immediately after signing the lease at the house, we then drove to this St. Paul's United Christ Church. So we actually, like, through time and space, like, we grounded that experience. But this is not the only number. This 256 I knew about, and when I was going through the process, I knew I wanted to tell the story, and I was creating the slides to tell the story, which we're witnessing right now. I'm like, well, let me go and check into this 93502. Like, I didn't think that was a number, or like a significant number. When I think of numbers, like, usually what goes into my mind would be like what are called Fibonacci numbers, or any sort of number which has like a truth to it, a mathematical truth to it. Like the tesseract number, there's a mathematical truth to that. And then that would be the most objectively true to me. And then secondly to that would be, like, let's say a historical truth, or maybe a personal truth, which is not quite as objectively strong. This is how my mind works. This is how my logic system works. So I'm preparing for this presentation, and I say, like, well, let me go just search in this 93502 with this sense inside of me, like, well, I don't think this is going to hit anything, but I'm going to go and check. And arguably, this is really the most significant of numbers because, I mean, a year is kind of objectively true. I mean, just because the whole notion of like leap year, maybe that throws it off a little bit, but days, a day counter is definitely like sunrise to sunrise. That is a functional, true, observable truth. So, all right. All that being said, I take this number, I put it into Google, put it right in there, 23502, and just hit search. And then this is the first thing that pops up, a zip code. Of course, a zip code. So here we got it. So we've got this zip code in Kern County, PA. So let's go look. I took this map, and we see this the red pin right here. It's right next to the Veterans Building. I clicked on that, and then this is what we get. First is this. Here's your 23502. It's in Mojave, California. This is the first thing I see. The first thing when looking at this, I'm like, oh, wow, there's Lancaster, California. I know Lancaster, California exists. I had no idea it was so close. Reefer City. So then there's that. So now I'm going to zero in a little bit more than that. And so where are we? We are right here, right next to the Mojave Air and Spaceport, next to the Spaceship Company. So now it's getting just like a little bit weird, right? And so let's go look right here. There's a small airfield about 2.5 hour drive north of Los Angeles that sits at the edge of a vast expanse of desert, and it attracts aerospace mavericks like moths to a flame. The Mojave Air and Spaceport. Like, what just popped into my mind as soon as I said that is the movie Interstellar, because if I recall, that was the Matthew McConaughey character. He was like this maverick, this airspace maverick, which it was probably based upon this area, which is the Mojave Air and Spaceport, which is currently like home to companies like Scaled Composites and Maston Space Systems, where they build lunar landers. But the reason for this being here is, like, yes, there's a variety of reasons, but the most practical and logical is that very close to this Mojave right here, this 93502, is that this is where the Edwards Air Force Base is, which is home of the Air Force Test Center, the Air Force Test Pilot School, NASA's Armstrong Flight Research, the Air Force Material Command, this is where all of this like cutting edge, and where I didn't go deep enough, but I would imagine this is going to be a very, it's at least 1 degree of separation away from Jack Parsons and Aleister Crowley and all of those projects. But like this all happened right here. This is very similar to, like, as we said before, the Interstellar, which is Tesseract, time travel, all of that. And somehow, for whatever reason, like on whatever level of reality, this is connecting. And that's what that number connects to, this part of California, this part of the world where so much of like space travel comes into play. But it gets even stranger. So we've got the Edwards Air Force Base. So now let's go look at this guy, Carl Spaatz. Who's Carl Spaatz? Carl Spaatz is the very first head of the United States Air Force. Spaatz became the U.S. Air Force first chief of staff. So when the Air Force became its own standalone department of military after World War II in 1947, their first chief of staff. So then, working in the Pentagon was this guy Spaatz. So where's Spaatz from? Oh yeah, he's from friggin' Boyertown. He's from freaking Boyertown, right? He's from right here where all this stuff is going on. And not only that, we've got like right here, when you're looking at Carl Spaatz on Wikipedia, a section of Route 562 in Berks County at the intersection of State 73. I've never been in this area before, but I'm driving 73 all the time when I drive back to see my boys. It's the road I go to. It is the township line between Amity Township and Ole Township. And on June 28th, 2018, it was named for him. This is the road. This is literally the road which is driven when, is that where it is? Where do I have that? This. Like when you take this road right here, this is that road to get from here to here. This is the Spaatz Air Force Road, the very first the head of the Air Force being where the Edwards Air Force Base is, This is all connects back. What the fuck are we talking about? How does this work? But it is. So let's go even a little bit further deeper. All right. So our story today began with what? And if you've been following me for a while, I'll come back to this topic a lot. But it's Steiner and the Waldorf School, because so much stuff in the journeys which I share, they tie in usually to my experiences at the Waldorf School, and that would be then connected to Steiner. And I'm assuming everyone understands why. Waldorf School education is also known as Steiner education because it's based upon his philosophies. I'm in no way a proponent nor an opponent of Steiner philosophies. I'm not even that particularly well versed upon them. I just know that it's a touch point in my life. So, all right. So shortly after seeing all this sort of stuff, like seeing the Air Force Base and all of that, I quickly do a search and I see, I do a search and I type in time travel and Mojave Desert, because we're in Mojave, California. And this is what comes up right away. A time machine in the Mojave Desert. A 4-story structure designed to recharge cell structure is now a recording studio and tourist attraction. And this building right here, and it was developed by George Van Tassel, built by him, an aviator and UFOologist, and was created as a time travel machine in the early 1950s. This is it right here. Here's another picture of it. It's located right here. So this is where Mojave is. This is where that spaceport is. This is where Edward Air Force Base is, and this is where this time machine in the desert is. So it's not exactly like, it's 2 hours away by car. How far? 113 miles. So I saw from Baltimore, or from Columbia, Maryland to Bechtelsville was 103 miles. This is 113 miles. But this is where it's located. And it's kind of touching upon these places. And what is involved there, this guy, George Van Tassel, that's the guy who built this, George Van Tassel. he built this integraton, and he started hosting group meditations in the 1950s. And he says he was visited by people from Venus. And, this got all the attention of like the FBI and the CIA and like all the people who we always talk about. They all go to this place, this integraton. So, all right. So I've never heard of this until like 2 days ago, and I'm putting this together, and I'm just kind of like laughing to myself, like at the nature of this story of what's unfolding, what I'm witnessing, what I'm watching. And so a lot of you, if you watch this show, you're probably aware that I do a regular show with Emily Moyer, a regular podcast called, there are two of them. One's called Project Kids and the other's called Playing the Glass Bead Game. And we don't do that regularly. Since I moved here, our what was a weekly show for over 2 years has now become like a once a month catch up for a variety of reasons. So I'm doing my research, and this is 2 days ago, February 1st, and I get this message. It's from Emily. This is a text. You can see it's February 1st. It's 1:46 p.m. And she's like, I have you in the book for Tuesday the 28th. Yes, and you should receive your package from Jeff. And so what this is this going to be the next time we're going to go and talk? And she is wanting me to watch this show about time travel, which I'm like, I can't watch it because I don't have internet access. She's like, oh, well, Jeff will go and he'll burn the episodes onto a thumb drive and he'll mail it to you. So that's what she's making reference to. So I write back yes and yes. And then I'm telling her, because I'm literally creating the slides, which we just saw. And I'm like, hey, major time travel connect that goes straight to the Mojave Desert. Working on it now. I brought this up because I know that it's California, and she's from California, and she's got a personal connection to it. And then she's like, oh, Jeff is in the Mojave Desert right now. He's going to Joshua Tree, and then he's coming here. So the same Jeff right here is now talked about as we're about the Mojave Desert. And so I respond to this like, I do a screenshot. This says a time machine in the Mojave Desert. I do a screenshot of this very article on my phone. I pulled it up so I can send her. I didn't want to type in all this stuff, but I want to give her like a little hint. So I'm doing this as she sends me this message. You see the times right away, or the time goes from 50 to 51, and then I send this to her. This thing. This is the integraton. This is the integraton is what this is talking about. And then she's like, oh, that's where Jeff is going. This Jeff who is going to Joshua Tree right now, and then to her is literally going to the integraton as I'm learning about it for the first time and circling back and telling this to Emily. All right. So that is occurring. So this is what I mentioned Rudolf Steiner. This is all, now we're going to bring it all back to Rudolf Steiner. So Steiner has this thing. I don't know how to pronounce it. It's a building. It is based upon the architecture of Rudolf Steiner, and this is what it's called. I'm just going to call it the G word because I don't want to mispronounce it and sound foolish, more foolish than I sometimes normally sound. And here's the very first one that was built. It was a timber and concrete structure designed by Rudolf Steiner. All sorts of things to be done there. It was a meeting space. It was a place where they did events. This is what it looked like. The building, this one, the very first one, it was destroyed by fire on January 1st, 2023. All right. So keep in mind that on January 1st, 2023 is the day which we go and we move into this house, Christy and I do. And let's take a look at this. This is what the building looks like, and this is the Steiner building. They're not exactly the same. They're both these like really big domes, and then the dome sits directly on top. There are windows or not windows there. There's a second floor right there. Perhaps there's a basement beneath it we can't see, but more or less this proportion between this first floor to this height of the dome and this, there seems to be some very strong similarities. And I also want to point out like this idea of this being built by or burnt by fire, like, this fire in the sky. Fire in the sky is often like a concept maybe connected to the Air Force. Remember, we got the Air Force Base right here. And where do we got the Air Force Base? We got the Air Force Base right here. Probably, arguably, the most famous of all Air Force bases. Definitely the most famous Air Force base as it relates to time and space. And the Air Force, the first leader of the Air Force, is connected to Boyertown. So we almost go full circle, and then I'm going to go completely full circle because Boyertown is probably best known for this. The Rhodes Scholar Opera House fire that occurred in 1908 in Boyertown, where approximately 400 men and women were in attendance, where 171 people were burned. There's your fire ritual. If you read the biography of Spatz, that's not Spatz. You'll see that he was born. He was what would that be? He'll be like 15, 16 years old when that fire took place, and it had a huge impact on his psyche. So whatever you want to go and read into that, we know that takes place. So, all right. There's my story, my friends. There's my practically time travel. This is where I am right now. So what's next? What's next for Uncle Mike? What's next for these stories? So, for me, in what's driving me right now, moving forward, is definitely the talk of meta paradigm shift and what that means. I'm not necessarily going to go and define that right now, but that is seemingly on the plate. And this goes hand in hand with what I call the post-conspiracy theory era. We are past the conspiracy theory. Something new must be happening. Otherwise, we're just going to get sucked down and stay in that Groundhog's Day of just like, going round and round looking at the same stuff. And this is going to be tied into the collapsing of false timelines and the practice of natural astrology. What I'm hoping to demonstrate with a lot of these stories as it relates to my life and all of these things, which I've brought you along with in telling my gonzo research tales and sharing with you my interest in moving away from false calendar systems and the practice of natural astrology, making my own date books, the building of the starboard, being able to use that as a way to become familiar with the heavens for the simple purpose of stepping out of conceptual time, stepping out of astrology narratives that come from Babylon, doing this all through this fellowship sort of thing, concept. That's really where I'm going to be putting my energy. And so that is what you can anticipate more of from me in the future. For those of you who have, if you're watching this, you've stuck by me over this past year, as I really haven't done that much. So I appreciate that. If you're interested in becoming involved or participating or playing along, a couple things which you could do is the Fellowship of the Boards. You can have your own starboard. I partner with a guy here who makes them, and so we could sell those. And then from there, you go and you come to these Fellowship of the Board meetings. And what we're doing is quite literally through shared experiences. And on the back end of this, I'm going to include the most recent Fellowship of the Board's meeting, so you can see how it goes. You will literally learn how to understand the heavens and the movements of the sky simply for the purpose of moving out of false timelines and storylines, but actually understanding what you are seeing with your own eyes, and integration of baseline reality and narrative reality. That's kind of the Fellowship of the Boards. We can participate in that. I'm doing one-on-one services again. And this has always been more or less the same as what I've called my skymancy or my biomancy sessions. Now I'm just calling it reframing services. And what it is applying this type of analysis, which I just did within my own journey. I would do that with your journey. And the purpose of that is mostly to shake things up, to get out of the Groundhog's Day experience, of which we all have been and are living to a certain degree. And the way you break that down is you begin to see your life from a different perspective, but not just like randomly, like something which can not be dismissed as like just fantasy. Like, you know, what we'll do is we'll look at your life and the events of your life, and we'll begin to see patterns from a new way, which allows the old patterns to kind of break down. Because if this is true, you know, what else can be true? Secondly, Subscribe Star. I've had my Subscribe Star up for a long time, and if any of you have been a participant in Subscribe Star, you know that the Uncle Mike is not very, very good at staying on top of that. Subscribe Star is kind of like a Patreon. You pay like a monthly fee, and you have access to stuff, and I've been grateful for all of those who've shown me support that way. But Christy has since taken over that, and she has turned it into an archive of all of the different videos which I've done in the past, some which are still available on YouTube, some which are not. So that is something which you guys can go and participate and experience. And then the last is these ground tent experiences here at Bechtelsville. We have up right now one bell tent, which kind of looks like a mini yurt. And soon there'll be a second bell tent up. Right now during the winter we have propane heaters in it, so they're warm and toasty inside, and we do grounding experiences in there. So if anyone is interested, there are going to be links in the body of this video, or in the text in this video beneath it. Feel free to reach out, ask questions, and hopefully, you know, we will continue to move forward together as this strange story continues to unfold. Until then, my friends, thank you for coming along, and I am excited to see how and where this brings us. We'll go through what we're going to do today, and you and I want to continue our conversation, Dale, and catch up, because I know that I want to hear what's going on in your life, and I owe you a call. And we got our bell tent set up now, also up here, so I want to have you up sooner than later. But where I want to begin this, and Sean, you and I, we were talking about this in the car ride today, is this idea of false timelines. It's a phrase which I hear a lot, and there's something about that which I think rings true. At least it does for me, and I don't know if it rings true for other people, if they've ever heard anyone talk about like we're on false timelines, or there's a false timeline, or something along those lines. But I've always kind of like personally struggled with the idea of like, well, what does that mean in reality? Like, okay, well, if there's a false timeline, well, what's the real timeline? And then how does that tie into like narrative and story? And it was a bit of a rabbit, going down a rabbit hole for me, or even like a dog chasing its own tail. But in the course of these fellowship of the board ceremonies, and this is only our third one, and it's still like beginning to solidify, at least within my mind, this idea of false timelines has gained a little bit of a clarity. And so, and it ties in directly to what we're doing. And I want to take a moment to describe that before we get into this. So there's if we want to go and look at our experiential reality from this idea of like, what is knowable or objectively true or real versus what is conceptual, what is like just totally like, fantasy and so forth. We can do that related to time. Another thing as it relates to time we hear often is, time isn't linear. Time is, something other than linear, which intuitively for me makes a lot of sense. Like, I'm like, okay, that makes sense, but explain that to me like in something which I can work with, something tangible, something real. And so false timelines fits with that as well. And I want to talk a moment about the real time. So we in culture our entire culture is built upon time and this collective agreement for what time is. And within the concept of our culture, like time is accurate. The days of the week make sense. We're all in agreement that, today is Saturday and tomorrow is Sunday and so forth. We're in agreement on like what year it is. We're in agreement on what month it is. We're in agreement of the time also, like, the time on my watch right here. We can agree upon that, and we can see that it holds a value. It holds a value in terms of like pretty much things that make our culture function. So without these agreed upon times, like, you could say in a very practical sense, like culture doesn't function. Like, when are you going to go and send in your bills? When are we going to go meet for this? When is my vacation? When do I know that this store is open? All these things are functions of culture, and we live in culture. And I'm not even in a critique of culture right now, just a discussion of the truth of what culture is. Time is true on that level, but these ideas of what we agreed upon about time, they're not real. They're only true within that cultural context. And so I've talked about this a lot before, particularly as it relates to months. Like, we know from the word month that month is based upon moon. Months range like between 28 and 31 days, which is more or less the lunar cycle or the moon cycle. We can see that there is a conceptual truth behind the idea of months with something observable and knowable, which is the cycles of the moon. But the moon, if the first of the month does not line up with a new moon or the dark moon, well, then it is fallacy. It is not in integration. It is a mental construct. It's not integrated with what you see with your eyes. Because if you were living in an integrated experience, your timekeeping mechanism, if you choose to go by something called like, months, well, then it should be in alignment with what a month is based upon. And so the takeaway of that is that, the months, the calendars, like they're accurate in the culture, but they have no basis in actual reality. And why that's significant, why I'm putting such amount of like a microscope on a seemingly insignificant thing, like, hey, Mike, how does this help me pay my bills? Well, it doesn't help you pay your bills. What it does is it helps you stop thinking about reality in the context of culture. We are in a paradox for those of us who recognize that we are in a petri dish dream of the way life is. And if we are going to think that we can escape it or leave it, we have to realize that everything which we think about reality has been formed by that same system. So we have to lean into a blind spot. And that's what the starboard is all about. This is how you lean into a blind spot, because we are moving into an actual time. We're moving into actual time, observable time, for the sole purpose of taking our consciousness outside of that petri dish, to allow something new to grow, something which maybe is in more harmony with the greater reality in which we find ourselves living. I want to give one more example of false time, just so you can see, like you can have a knowable example of what false time is. We think, our culture has taught us to think that the next calendar day, the next day of the week, begins at midnight. But there is no such thing as midnight. There is no observable midnight in our experiential reality. There's sunrise. You could say the new day begins on sunrise, and that's going to be an observable truth. You could say the new day begins on sunset. That's an observable truth. You could even say the new day begins on high noon. High noon is when the sun is at the midheaven or the highest point of the ecliptic, because that is an observable truth. But there's no midnight. Midnight only exists as a concept. Like, it's an implied existence that, like, at some point there's an opposite of the midheaven, but there's no way to know it. So when we are thinking about, like, the future, the next day begins at midnight, we've already committed to thinking about the events that have yet to unfold in a fallacious sort of agreement. And so that is, again, another example of why we're going to the starboard. We're going to the starboard to develop the muscle of, like, we're stepping out of time and stepping into a time which is observable and knowable. We got a little bit of feedback there. I think that's from you, Dale. If you could go and mute that. Maybe I'll mute it for you. There we go. All right. So we're going to begin this starboard session. Yeah, we're recording. We're going to begin this starboard session with just a centering exercise. Like, I've got a sweet spot for cards. I love cards. Tarot cards, oracle cards, playing cards, like, they speak to me. But part of this exercise in which we're doing is we want to kind of step out of narrative. And the downside, in my opinion, of many of the, like, oracle or tarot cards are, like, some of them come with a little bit of heaviness. And when they come with a heaviness, like, if you know tarot and you pick the Tower card, you're like, yeah, you could spin it like, well, tarot's good for me. Like, let me allow this to collapse so something new begins. But, like, if you're going to go pick a tarot card before, like, something you don't want to see collapse, like, I don't necessarily want to add that into my consciousness. So what we have here, this deck of cards, is they're just single words, and every single one of these words are, at least in my opinion, are words which anyone in any situation could get behind the concept and find some level of stability to like stand upon. So what we're going to do is we're going to pick a card, have a little bit of fun with that, read the definition, and then just do a brief centering exercise, which I'll lead you through, to embody what that word is that we're about to pick. And then we're going to go and build our chart. So let us begin.
Deep breath, we pull.
Deep breath, we pull a card. And here's our card. Harmony. And let me read the definition. What I love about these cards is they give these great definitions on the back. Harmony, the quality of forming a pleasing and consistent whole. Harmony, agreement. That's where the definition is. All right. So as an embodiment exercise, we want to find ourselves in a good, comfortable posture, rooted, grounded on the seat which you find yourself upon, whether that's the floor, the ground, a boat, or this bench here. spine perpendicular to the surface of the earth. And what we want to do is begin with 5 deep but rhythmic breaths. And by rhythmic, I mean making the inhale and the exhale roughly the same length. So let's begin that on our own. All right. Keeping your eyes shut, continuing with the internal posture that we've just cultivated. I want you to bring your awareness to your beating heart. However you sense it, feel it, bring your awareness to that way of knowing your own body. The beating heart is the only part of our internal anatomy that there's no confusion about. There's no missing it. Whatever or however designed our form has made this part of ourselves a focal point that could not be missed. With your awareness on your beating heart, inhale the word harmony inside your mind space. And exhale. Harmonizing your mind with your body, with your heart. And just finding yourself at the center of your world. One more inhale of harmony. And when you exhale, you may open your eyes. All right, my friends. That is one way in which we can embody a concept. And so now that we've embodied harmony, let us build the chart of what is in the sky at this shared moment in experience.
So that we may come into harmony and embodies that govern our universe.
All right, so we can come into harmony with the planetary bodies that govern our universe. All right. Will you do me the favor and read me our positions?
Did you notice that the harmony rainbow, is exactly this center?
It's the perfect.
Circle.
All right, so this is kind of cool. So if you look closely right here, there's like this circle. Like you could see the top of that rainbow and the reflection down here. If you, let's see if I can show it. Oh, we're going to do this right now. I'm going to switch. You're going to see this right now because we're switching. It lines up with this circle right here in the center of the starboard perfectly. So there's the harmony that we've been waiting for.
And we're at the center, and you told us to stand in the center.
And this is us in the center. So, all right, we're going to leave this right here. So we're going to begin with the sun.
8 degrees Aquarius.
Sun at 8 degrees Aquarius. This is Aquarius. This right here is my sun line. This is 0 degrees Aquarius, 29. I'm going to say 8 degrees is right about there. Moon.
12 degrees Taurus.
12 degrees Taurus. So this is the moon line. 12 degrees is right here. So today is the first quarter moon. So let's go look at astrodynamics right now. 7 days ago, the last time Christy and I did the starboard, and hopefully you're doing your starboard at home, it was the new moon, which meant the moon and the sun were in the same place. Now, 7 days have gone by and we find the moon right here. This is approximately 30, 60, 90 degrees. The moon is 90 degrees away from the sun. This angle is a 90-degree angle, and that creates a square in astronomy or astrology terminology. And we see that expressed in the sky as a half moon. It is part of the confusion by calling it a quarter moon when it visually looks like a half moon, but nonetheless, we're really smart folks here, so we are not tricked by that trickery. So this is what it looks like right here. A quarter moon has a 90-degree relationship between the moon and the sun. Mercury.
13 degrees.
Capricorn, 13 degrees right here. Venus.
2 degrees Pisces.
2 degrees Pisces. This is a unique placement. So Mercury, Venus, and Sun are always close to each other. Mercury will always be within 30 degrees of the sun, and Venus will always be within 60 degrees of where the sun is. Often you will see Mercury and Venus like on the same side of each other. Right now we're finding the sun in the middle of Mercury and Venus. We can see by this placement, we could rotate this right here. The sun rises as it crosses the ascendant, but as you can see, Mercury is rising beforehand. So if you are up in the morning in the hour before the sun rises on the eastern horizon, you're going to see Mercury. Now, what we're seeing right now, however, is Venus is visible in the sky, but it's only visible in the sky once the sun sets. Let's go to Mars.
9 degrees Gemini.
9 degrees Gemini. And Mars has been sitting in this placement for quite some time, maybe 3 weeks now, because Mars has been moving from retrograde to direct. So particularly for those of us who have anything of significance in this 9 degree, 10 degree Gemini, if your sun is there, if your moon is there, any sort of personal planet, and if you've been feeling a certain sort of way, whether you could probably begin to understand your relationship with the planet of Mars, because it is unusual for Mars to be this still in the sky. So this is a good point of reflection for the point of understanding your inner world's relationship with the external world's movements. Jupiter.
5 degrees Aries.
Saturn.
25 degrees Aquarius.
So we can see that Saturn and Venus were conjunct about a week ago. They were in the exact same spot. Now Venus is right here, but this is technically, in my opinion, still a conjunction. It's a really special conjunction. This is a really interesting conjunction as it relates to the Saturn archetype and the Venus archetype of structure and of relating. Chiron, yes. 12 degrees Aries. Chiron has been stuck in this Aries position for it seems like a year now.
It's been, well, yeah, a couple of moon phases.
Well, no, it definitely has been because this is where my Chiron is located.
Oh, yeah, oh, I see.
Let's go look back. I'm just curious where was Chiron located when I began this?
Oh, you went that far.
Where's Chiron? Oh, when did it get into Aries? Oh, this is tropic. This is sidereal. That's why that's confusing.
Right here.
Yeah.
tropical.
Yeah.
88,
So it's in that same area. Chiron has a very unusual orbit, and there's certain places where it stays longer. That the key.
Okay.
And so it's been in this part of the Aries for a very long time. And why I'm aware of that is because that's where my Chiron is. So anyone who was born in the early 70s, they've been going through this Chiron return, and Chiron in some parts of its orbit moves very fast. In some places it moves very slow, and it moves very slow in Aries.
And so, and what does that mean for you? Like, what, how do you?
Conceptually, it means like Chiron is all about like the wounded healer. So it's a little bit uncomfortable, but it comes with wisdom. That's what they tell you in the books. I just want to see what it's like when it moves off. As an experiment. Okay. Let's go on to Uranus.
14 degrees Taurus.
Uranus is at 14 degrees Taurus. Uranus has been sitting in retrograde for, let's see, how long has it been in retrograde?
Uranus.
It's all through there. Let's go look over here.
August 27th, 2022.
So Uranus has been in retrograde for almost 6 months. And now it's moving forward. Anytime there's a change, like last week or the last time we did the Starboard as a group, the Fellowship of the Boards, there were quite a few planets that went from retrograde to direct. Mars was one of them, if I'm remembering correctly, so was Neptune. And so rather than using a book definition of what that means, I like to bring more awareness into life and inner world. And what this is going to represent is the motion of a particular body in the heavens has changed. And so a way to reflect upon that is to look in your life, like, what has changed directions. Retrograde can be defined as going from internal to external, to going backwards, to going forwards. The specific in the narrative can be to you, the author of your life, but the observer should be looking for change right now if you want to go and understand how these changes from direct to retrograde affect oneself. All right, Neptune. Pisces. Neptune at 25 degrees Pisces. Pluto. 28 degrees Capricorn. And then the nodes. 8 degrees Taurus. North node's at 8 degrees Taurus, which means the south node is going to be completely opposite. That is 8 degrees Scorpio. And then now, do we want to put anything on the board to kind of ground this in with an intention? It's very heavily, this is what we need to do. We got to set the board. So right now the sun is set in Boyertown, Pennsylvania, set probably 2 hours ago, I would say if this is the western horizon, the sun would be right here. That's the sun. Will you rotate it? So do you remember when we drove over here and we're saying, look at Venus in the sun? So when we drove over, it was probably like this, above the horizon,
Okay.
and now it's no longer visible.
Oh, wow. So you just called it.
Now we could probably see, we're still gonna be able to see, when we go outside, we should be able to see the moon. And the moon is gonna be near Mars, and we'll be able to see Jupiter.
Really? Jupiter.
That's Jupiter.
What about, will we see this?
Nope, you can't see that. You can't see this, Neptune. So Saturn is the planet furthest away that you can see with the naked eye. Mars you can see, Jupiter you can see, Venus and Mercury as well. We've got this right here in the center for wholeness. We've got harmony. Any final words from you?
Any final minutes from anyone else?
Dale, Sean, are there any comments, any reflections, questions, or anything you would like to add before we wrap up our session of the Fellowship of the Board? I will take that as a no. Well, then with that, with this seashell, with this shell, we do wed harmony. Thank you for participating, and we will be doing this again. In what moon? In the worm moon. The next time is the worm moon. So until then, my friends, enjoy yourself.